I think I got it 2 summers ago, and I was just like reading little bits at a time, and then I got to a point where it was like I couldn't put it down. So I got it 2 years ago. The best. So I'm gonna go give us another couple more minutes. So who wants to share? I feel like I haven't talked to you guys in forever. I don't know, but who wants to share a win that they had, let's just say this week or this last week that we had? Shelby, all I can see is you right now. So
I'm like trying to think what I did last week.
And let's go and talk about sleepy poo. Get this out of the way. So it takes me a while to get it like pulled up here. All right, we're slow here. Present. Okay, can everybody see this? Okay, cool. Oh, okay, wow, boom. All right, so a lot of what I'm going to talk about is, this is really just a headline, but I talk about way more than that. How you can lose weight by sleep priority and positions. So like the last thing I'm going to talk about is like sleep positions that are beneficial for you, and how you should try to start setting up how you go into bed. So sleep when you are dead, you might actually die sooner. And I know all of you have heard this, maybe you even heard this when you were younger. But somebody said, you know, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And I know I've heard this before. I know I've told myself this just to encourage myself to stay up for a late night with friends. I think my boyfriend in high school actually even said this all the time. He's like, yeah, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I'm like, oh, okay. But that is the furthest thing from the truth, because what actually happens with consistent lack of sleep is closer we get to actual death. Like, our body actually starts shutting down as we start neglecting sleep. So what less than 7 hours of sleep impacts? Ability to gain weight, if that's what you want, but nobody really just wants to gain weight. You have decreased attention, focus, reproductive health issues, immunity issues, and hormone issues. And I say less than 7 hours because ideal sleeping is anywhere between 7 to 9 hours. So if you're wondering this whole time, well, how much should I be sleeping? Anywhere between that range. And what we see with the impacts of a lot of things I'm talking about is what happens when we get that less than 7. So diving into the weight gain. So with 4 to 6 hours, which again falls under that less than 7 hours, it impacts how your body begins to gain weight. With increased weight, it leads to hypertension. Prolonged hypertension leads to diabetes, and cascade of events with diabetes that we know of. Just 5.5 hours of sleep for 2 weeks while dieting lost 70% of pounds from lean muscle, not fat. So let me rephrase that. If you are dieting and you're sleeping less than 7 hours of sleep, you are actually losing your lean muscle mass and not fat. Even though you're trying really hard to go into calorie deficit and all your work into building this physique, you're actually shunting your ability to generate lean body mass and tap into that fat mass when you're not getting good sleep. So 8.5 hours for 2 weeks of dieting, for people who are dieting, 50% of pounds were lost from fat, not muscle. So very, very important thing there to consider. The downside of that too is if you are dieting and you've been dieting for quite a while, you will have kind of sleep impacting that as well. So most people who are in a calorie deficit, or they even did these studies in starvation, people were not getting adequate sleep because your body is like, it's trying to survive at all costs, and sleeping isn't one thing that it cares about. Obesity and sleep apnea impacts how well you sleep, which kind of, I think obesity leads to sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is basically you're not breathing during sleep. And a lot of people who are obese, you will find that they do have sleep apnea. So it's kind of a vicious circle because if you're obese, you could be obese because of a lot of other variables, but your lack of sleep isn't helping that. And then now you're not sleeping well because you have sleep apnea, which is increasing your ability to gain weight as well. Do you guys hear my cat in the background? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm like listening with these AirPods, so everything else outside of me is muted, but I can vaguely hear him, so I don't know how bad it is. With 4 to 6 hours of sleep, it impacts your cortisol levels. I talk about cortisol a lot, but we generally, from morning to night, we wake up, we have a higher amount of cortisol, and it slowly trickles down as we dive into the evening. That is normal. But with lack of sleep, that increases our already high cortisol levels to outside of good normal levels. That impacts our state of fat burning and increased testosterone. So when we wake up, it is good to have high cortisol because it does help with focus and in that peak metabolic state. But with this increased cortisol, we see increased waistlines because with that lack of sleep, the cortisol makes you more likely to eat and makes you choose different choices when you're eating. And I'll dive into this as well. But cortisol actually releases bacteria. I don't know why it says releases bacteria. It releases bacteria that prevents the absorption of nutrients. Wow, a whole lot of typos there, Shelby. Yeah, you're right. Okay. So when we have high cortisol, it releases bacteria that prevents absorption of nutrients. Now, remember when I talked about cortisol, having those heightened peaks of cortisol is that fight or flight state, right? That's where we are when we're in an athletic event. We're hyper-focused. We don't care about food. We don't care about digesting food. We need to get through this race or get through this contest, and that's all we care about. Our body is primed for performance there, not digestion of foods. So if we have heightened states of cortisol, we're not really digesting much food at all. And if you are somebody that is, getting less sleep, it's not just high cortisol right when you wake up. You're having high cortisol throughout your entire day. Throughout your entire day, as you're eating, you're not absorbing and having good digestion of those foods because you're in that heightened state. Yeah, so I definitely talked about this, but impacts how we store and what foods we choose to eat. Have you guys ever had a night where you didn't get much sleep? Let's say it was a night of partying or whatever. Maybe it's not partying because we have alcohol involved in that, but let's just say it was a night you stayed up and the next morning you wake up and you're just reaching for crazy stuff. You're like reaching for high carbs, high fat foods. You're like, I can't understand why I'm going for these things. Or maybe you can't stop eating. This is a day where you're just like hungry hour after hour. This is correlated to lack of sleep. So when we have lack of sleep, we end up opting to reach for high carb and high fat foods due to the impact on our satiety hormones and stuff like that. But appetite is not controlled with sleeping less. Actually in here, it says appetite isn't controlled with less sleep, eating an extra 300 calories per day. So if you're sleeping less than 7 hours, and this is you, and you're eating an extra 300 calories per day each time you're not sleeping, think of what that adds up to in a week. Now, this isn't to say it's everyone. Maybe you're somebody that just doesn't eat at all when you're stressed or not having sleep at all. Maybe you just have zero appetite. That could be the case as well. But generally speaking, based upon these studies, is appetite is crazy because of the hormones that are impacted, and that leads you to eating an extra 300 or more, I would say, calories per day. So adds up pretty quickly. So there was a case study that they did on daylight savings and hospital visits. And what they found that daylight savings, we end up losing an hour sleep, right? So on that morning after daylight savings, there is a 24% increased risk of heart rates on that morning. Basically, that's leading to hospital visits. 24% increased risk. Now, on the flip side, in the fall, when we gain sleep, right? We fall back. Yeah, so we gain sleep in the fall. There was a 21% drop of hospital visits on that time after the fall time change. So huge correlation between losing just 1 hour of sleep and impacting someone's day and then sending them to the hospital. Now, do these people have pre-existing conditions? Yes, some of them did. But if you're looking at how much sleep impacts our life, It is literally right here. So that's just crazy. They also did a study and saw that after daylight savings, that next day, there was less production at work, like in jobs. People were less productive. There was more car accidents, which is crazy. So all of this is detailed in this book. So many different studies that they went across with sleep and all this study. So that was just crazy for me to think about. Like, wow, that's only 1 hour. We just lost 1 hour and this happens. So in general, with sleep or lack of sleep, there is an increase in weight, which leads to an increase in fat mass. Increase in fat mass will lead to increased risk of obesity. Increased risk of obesity, or if you are obese, you have an increased risk for heart attacks and strokes. And with that, daylight savings gonna hit you and you'll be sent to the hospital. So sleep can literally save your life. The next part was attention. So this is basically how it impacts our scared by him. Impacts our attention. I'm gonna let somebody in because I think somebody's trying to get in. Chelsea's in. Okay. No, whenever I do this, I can't get it off. There we go. With lack of sleep, it impacts our attention. So now pay attention to why this is relevant. Driving your car. Maybe you're focused at work. Think about the bus driver that's taking your kids to work, or your nieces or nephews, doctors performing surgeries. We want these people to be paying good attention, right? When we're driving to work, we want that person next to us that's on the freeway paying attention to us over here. Hey, don't merge over, I'm here. All of this impacts our attention and decision-making process. I would dive in a little bit more about the focus at work, but let's see if I can pull this up here. But basically they did a study with, or not even a study, this guy worked with Nike and maybe even, I forget what other company it was, but Nike was one of them, that he was sent to do like sleep studies on their employees, and they gave their employees more hours of sleep and like less time required that they had to be at work. So say there's a 9 to 5, they let people individualize their sleep so that they could come in, still work their hours, but we're able to adjust to the sleep cycles because as I'll mention later on, we all have varying sleep cycles, whether we're a night owl or we're a morning bird. That goes back to evolutionary speaking, but I'll talk about it in a little bit. But they had so much more increased productivity at work, and these companies ended up making more income because they were able to have better employees making good decisions, bringing them in more money and a more successful business. So this guy directly worked with Nike and some other top industry companies to either helping them shift their their employees like work schedule, or offering them actual like nap stations so they can nap during the day, because I'll talk about a little bit, naps are still important, although it doesn't really help get our sleep back. But attention to detail, we want these people to be paying attention, aka they should be sleeping. But unfortunately, like, how many times do we have doctors that work night shifts or varying work schedules, and are they sleeping? This is all things to consider. A top leading cause of death is falling asleep at the wheel. And this is what occurs after having less than 7 hours of sleep. And I mean chronically. This isn't going to probably happen just one time that you don't get enough sleep, because that's normal to have one night where we don't get good sleep, right? That's a normal thing. But for something that continuously happens, this is what we're talking about. Deprived deep non-REM sleep deals with attention and keeping important memories from the day. So if we're depriving our bodies from, or our minds from this, our bodies from this, we're not able to draw as much attention. We're not able to think clearly, make good decisions, and remember things that we're supposed to remember the day before. So think about those times you stayed up in college, cramming and studying, and you remember them maybe for that test, but it was gone. It was not anywhere there after that exam. So a study was also done on truck drivers and their increased risk of error while driving from deprived sleep, doing night transports and all that good stuff. Nurses and doctors who work night shifts, this is especially important for them in maintaining good health. One of the worst things we have done as a culture is creating jobs for night shift. And I would also throw in here about sticking people to a 9 to 5 schedule. I don't think that's appropriate for everybody, and could be, causing people to not be as good of human beings as they are, because they're forced into this standard of 9 to 5. You better be here 8:30 because we're getting going. So how this impacts reproductive health, and this is more speaking for men, but we also have testosterone, as we talked about last week. But with 4 to 6 hours of sleep, there is a drop in testosterone. So that's our fat burning, our good stamina, muscle building machine type of hormone, all that good stuff we talked about. And for men, they have a 29% lower sperm count that has deformities. Like, that's a pretty good amount with deformities too. And smaller testes, so less area for building good sperm. With 4 to 6 hours of sleep, we women have a 20% drop in our follicular releasing hormones affecting conception. This is also during our menstrual cycle. So this is when we're actually bleeding, and like right before we start to bleed, the follicular cycle. So it does impact your menstrual cycle when you're starting it, if you're starting it, and all that, which we know stress impacts our menstrual cycle too. So a lot of these things are connected. So many of these aspects are connected. Beauty sleep, and yes, it is a real thing. So I went back into the book and read this before hopping on here, that they did a study of taking photographs of these women who had over 8 hours of sleep, and they had the same makeup done to them. And then they took women that had less than 7 hours of sleep and put them all lined up together. And they took it to a board to pick out the prettiest, what is the most appealing picture. And every single person on that board picked the woman that had more than 7 hours of sleep. So yes, beauty sleep is real. It does impact your glow, your energy, and your physical attractiveness. A lot more details on that, but that specific study was interesting of like, okay, it's not like the people had bags under their eyes, right? Like we would think, oh, okay, yeah, if I didn't get good sleep, I'm going to look like hell. But these people both had makeup, but they were still able to distinguish, or they didn't even know, right? They didn't know who had sleep and who didn't, but they were still able to pick out the people who had slept the most. It impacts our immunity. So with lack of sleep, it can alter our ability to catch the flu. And let's not to mention the biggest flu or issue going on right now is COVID. It limits our body's ability to uptake the flu virus with protective cells. So even if you do get a flu shot, it could prevent that from even being effective, and HIV is added in there. You have an increased risk of developing cancer by up to 40% because it literally impacts our immune system. Like, this is like the biggest thing to take away, not the biggest thing to take away from this, but this is true. Very, very true. If you consistently do not get good sleep, you do not give your body a chance to heal, to kind of work through all these cells that it's supposed to be manifesting, that it's supposed to be removing, getting rid of these highly toxic things that are going through our body. So you're not giving your body a chance to overcome anything, which is why, when you were young, your mother kind of let you go to sleep. She's like, all right, you can just sleep, rest and sleep. That is so true, because it's our body's shot at overcoming sickness and actually building up a tolerance or immunity. So a case study, just one night of sleep at 4 hours swept away 70% of natural killer cells in our immune system. That's huge. Huge. This is especially important for those night shift workers. It increases your risk for breast cancer, prostate, uterus, and colon cancer. Denmark was the first country to start to pay worker compensation for a woman who developed breast cancer after years of night shift work in a government job. That's incredible. That's incredible. They literally paid her for her developing breast cancer because they realized that we led her to that by having her work these hours. This is related to the SNS spike, which is increased inflammation. Not getting sufficient sleep when fighting cancer fertilizes its growth. This is so damning that the World Health Organization has officially classified nighttime shift workers as a probable carcinogen, which means cancer causing. This really hits home for me because my dad's worked night shifts for 30 years. And when I was reading this book, I kept sending him all this information. And you can help somebody out as much as possible and give them these resources of like, here, this is what I read. Like, would you mind implementing this? Or would you mind this is a big example. Like, you can't make somebody care as much as you do. And some people just think like, this is how it's going to be. This is the way it is. But my dad is on sleeping pills, and he manages it well, but it still concerns me that like he is literally in increased risk of cancer walking around because he's been doing it for 30 years. So that's, you know, my biggest worry and fear, 100%. And next, obviously this impacts a lot more, but just want to dive into a little bit of hormones. So we naturally create these hormones, right? We create growth hormones, cortisol, endorphins, and growth hormones are necessary for muscle tissue repair. It's a fat metabolizer. Cortisol, talked about that. That's our focus. That's activated by our nervous system. It cultivates bacteria. That's good and bad. Endorphins is a natural opioid. That's kind of what we get after we work out, right? It's pain reducer and a happy feeling. So we naturally create those, but sleep has a way to impact all of these. Endocannabinoids are chemicals produced by the body that stimulate appetite. Here we have leptin and ghrelin. These are the two hormones that are impacted by sleep that influence our hunger and satiety. One is literally blocked. So our satiety hormone is blocked by sleep. That increases our hunger cues, which is why you'll find yourself continuously eating on a night that you slept really bad, and opting for bad choices to eat. We tend to go for simple and complex carbs, high calorie food choices. And this is also related to the fact that we talked about that sleep impacts our ability to make good judgment. And this is one of that too, is the prefrontal cortex is silenced in our decision making. So tend to overeat by not making rational decisions. A lack of sleep, just in general, I kind of summarize this from another article. It impacts our cholesterol metabolism and inflammation. So increase of having higher cholesterol, which we know is, there's good and there's bad cholesterol, but it's elevating the bad one. In our ability to metabolize cholesterol, which helps with our hormone regulation. Insulin resistance, we want insulin to be sensitive. We want to be like susceptible to it. We want it to impact us and our bodies make a decision and movement based off of that. Insulin resistance means we don't do anything with insulin, or we don't do anything with the physical eating. We're just blah. Lessen satiety, increased mortality rate, cortisol disruption, disrupting our entire sleep-wake cycle, decrease energy expenditure. We're going to downregulate, worsen productivity during the day, blah, 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 blah. Already talked about all that stuff. So circadian rhythm. If we don't sleep in sync with seasonal light exposure, if we don't sleep in sync with seasonal light exposure, according to the circadian rhythm, we can alter our biological rhythms that control hormones and neurotransmitters that determine appetite, both mental and physical health. So we have a 24-hour circadian rhythm, and this is what we typically operate on, and it is cycled by daylight, right? So a pre-alarm clock, we woke up by the sun and slept by the night. So before the alarm clock, this is where, like, evolutionary speaking, or we can backtrace hundreds of years ago, but we woke up when the sunlight came through, and we went to sleep as sunlight went to darkness. That was our circadian rhythm. We're kind of set up that way, which if you find yourself being sleepy in the evenings right now, around 6 or 7 o'clock, you're not at guilt, right? Because that is how we were evolutionarily wired, to go to sleep when the sun goes down. But we have now created this 9 to 5 type of lifestyle. We've also created artificial lights everywhere, and it is everywhere next to your nightstand. It is here right now where I'm at. All these access points to light impacts our ability to release melatonin. So we naturally release it, and when we aren't able to release it, it still keeps this kind of alerted state of mind, impacting our sleep later on. And here's the point of if you're a night owl or somebody that is a morning bird. Do you feel like anybody here is a night owl? Just go ahead and like nod your head, yeah, if this is you. I don't feel like I am. I'm kind of somewhere in between, but a lot of people have trouble adjusting to the 9 to 5 life. Who feels like this 9 to 5 thing isn't for them? Just go ahead and like nod or no if you're cool with it. If you've ever thought that, or you're somebody that stays up late and you've been criticized for it, maybe by your employees or your boss or whatever, it's okay. Hopefully we can find a way for you to adjust, but it doesn't mean you're lazy. It doesn't mean you're abnormal, because a lot of people think, oh, those people that sleep in are lazy, which isn't typically always the case. we are actually biologically wired to be either morning persons or night people, backtracking to our history of hunters and gatherers. So who had to stay up and watch our, let's just say, our little cave when we had sleeping families inside? Who was going to be the one to watch over us? There had to be somebody, right? So we have been smart, and we have somebody that protects our tribe as we're sleeping. So this person was the night owl. They had to be like that in order to protect us, to keep evolution going, right? To procreate, to keep life. So those people are naturally night owls, and that could be traced back to where you got to how you are right now. Or you could be the morning owl, which when the hunters or the people that were awake in the night protecting us had to go to sleep, we had other people that were protecting them as they're sleeping, and so on and so forth. So back tracing that is, if you ever felt like you were a night owl, it could be because of that, or maybe you're a morning person because somewhere down your line, that's what your family was doing, was staying up and protecting the tribe at different hours. Another point is your kids aren't lazy. I remember my parents in my teenage years, giving me crap for sleeping until 10 or noon. And I'm not like that now, but actually looking at it is our circadian rhythm changes as we grow up. So your child, right, this is like 5 to 6 years or younger, they go through different phases of their circadian rhythm where their brain is literally growing. It's creating these things. It's going through a cycle to really help build a foundation. And then once they get to our teenage years, we go through a different circadian rhythm cycle where we are staying up a little bit later. So if you ever were a little kid and say you're 5 years old and you wanted to try to stay up late with your older siblings or your parents, you just couldn't do it no matter how hard you tried. You fell asleep on the couch, they had to carry you to bed. That's because at that point in time, your brain is wired to follow a certain circadian rhythm to help grow, solidify all the things that you're learning and putting into practice. So your sleeping hours were a little bit different, where you would wake up earlier. Maybe you woke up before your parents and then you went to bed earlier. Then we phase into teenage years where we tend to find ourselves, or teenagers are not so much as, solidifying a lot of what they were learning because they have learned all this. They go into a different phase where they are staying up later. And that's literally how their circadian rhythm is wired. And a lot of parents will try to fight this. And worse off is we have school systems where now school systems would start at, I've even heard of kids having to go to school at like 6 a.m. And that is outrageous. But even more so, schools, they're forcing them into schools where now they're stuck going to school earlier when their circadian rhythm has them up late at night, and they literally are lacking waking up early in the morning. So if your kid is sleeping in, they're not lazy. It is a cycle that they're going through. And as we turn into adults, our sleep cycles again, and we change so that we can stay up a little bit later than say that our kids that are 5 and 6 years old, but it shouldn't be, somewhere past 11 or 12 if you're a morning person. So what about naps? Are we supposed to nap? Naps can be beneficial in helping, but it doesn't literally get back the time that we missed maybe the night before. The damage is done. That impact to our immune system already happened. But what you can do is implement naps. This is anywhere between 10 to 20 minutes, has been shown to improve a lot of benefit. Anything over that half-hour mark, if you're somebody that's taking 2-hour naps, it's not ideal because it's now impacting how you sleep later on when you try to go to bed at night. And one example I want to provide here is just, something from the book is Usain Bolt, before he broke all of his records at the Olympics, before he won the gold medal in whichever one it was, he literally took a 20-minute nap before he got out onto the blocks. A lot of athletes implement sleeping, and maybe you just slept because of how much you were working, but it has been shown to be hugely beneficial in athletic performance for implementing naps and actually having better sleep cycles. So Usain Bolt is awesome. The following are ways to benefit your sleep and improve sleep quality. The number one way to impact your health, benefit your body transformation literally begins where you end the day, like literally at your pillow. It's the key to longevity. If you don't believe me, highly recommend you pick up a copy of this book. I love it so much. Sam, add it to your list. This is amazing. I love that book so much. So kind of going to go through a lot of these points here. The best sleep practices: stick to a sleep schedule. Don't try to make up for your sleep on the weekends. That doesn't happen. You can't make up for sleep that is already lost. So I've talked a lot, or you guys might have read some of my posts about the alarm clock and snoozing. Alarm clocks aren't necessarily a bad thing now. We kind of have to have them in place, but the point of snoozing it does a lot of harm to our body. So if you can stick to a sleep schedule where you rise and fall around the same time and do that Monday through Sunday, so that you're not the person that tries to make up sleep on the weekend and then come Monday morning, you're lost, you're deficient again because you can't keep up with it. So keep something that is consistent. Don't exercise right up to your bedtime. The problem with this is that we have an elevated body temperature. And with an elevated body temperature, it lacks our ability to fall asleep. We need to have a core temperature body drop in order to induce sleep. You will notice this if you're somebody that likes to have the room cold. You will notice this if you're somebody that likes to have a fan that's blowing. Maybe that's for sound, but maybe it's also to lower your body temp. If you're ever been that person that can't sleep with socks on, that's your body trying to tell you, you know what, take these off. I need to drop my core temperature down. If you're somebody that needs to have their leg or arm outside of your blankets or pillow, something like that, that's another way for your extremities to be exposed to air to cool off your core body temperature so you can induce sleep. Your body is smarter than you. Don't try to outsmart it. Avoid caffeine and stimulants after 2 p.m. I say 2 p.m., but a lot of people would argue you could even go earlier than that. I talk a little bit more about caffeine down here, so I'll leave that for later. But if you are somebody that feels like you need, because somebody in my DMs asked me a lot of these questions, but they're like, well, I feel like I need energy before my workout. And I'm like, well, then I would look at number one, how you're sleeping. 2, look at your meal quality. If you're not eating good foods, if you're not having a pre-workout meal or anything like that, I would even maybe go as far as to say, if all that is in alignment, maybe you need an intra-workout meal or need to be eating or drinking something during your workout. But you shouldn't lean to caffeine in order to get you through your workout. If you show up and you're robbed of energy and it ain't happening, give yourself some grace and just try again the next day, because your body probably just needs sleep. And maybe you had a really shitty day and just it isn't for you. So avoid alcohol before bed. So this is for my people who have the nightly glasses of wine. And guys, I have had alcohol before I go to bed, right? I'm not sitting here acting like I'm perfect. I've literally had wine before bed or wine with my last meal. But the bad part of that is it does rob you of REM sleep. So even though you could feel like you slept okay with, I'm gonna plug in my charger. Maybe you feel like you slept okay with wine. You're like, well, wine makes me sleepy. It helps me sleep better. What actually happens is you go through fragmented sleep periods where you wake up and you don't even realize that you had fragmented sleep, but you went through fragmented phases of sleep and periods of wakefulness, even though you don't remember it. So it definitely does impact your sleep, and a lot more about that alcohol is highlighted in the book and its impact. So it is also a depressant. So it literally depresses areas of our brain and areas of the brain. So think of how that's going to impact your sleep. If it's depressing areas of your brain that should be functioning, you're missing out on aspects of your sleep as well. Avoid large meals before bed. I know there's that whole rest and digest thing, but your body shouldn't be trying to break down food and absorb nutrients while you're sleeping. It should just be resting and getting to work at the finer tuned things like cellular regeneration and healing your body and things like that. So when you eat large, and I'm saying large meals, right? If it's just a small snack or something like that, you're fine. Just avoid those large meals, as it does disrupt your sleep because your body is trying to digest everything, and rather than just get to working on the other things that it should. Implement 10 to 20 minute naps if needed. Relax before bed. Try to ease your way into bed. Don't be all riled up going into bed. Probably not going to sleep well. Really try to implement things to help relax. Maybe that's reading a book before bed. Maybe that's, I would say, watching a nighttime show, but again, we could talk about the blue light with that as well, and artificial lights. But Take a hot bath or shower before bed, either or. Washing your face too with cold water or even hot water, cleaning your face, those things induce relaxation and also impact your core temperature. So your body's going to drop as soon as you get out of that hot bath, right? Because it needs to get back to a baseline and that homeostasis. So that'll also impact your core temperature. Darken your bedroom. If there is literally any light in there, it is awakening. Our body is awakened to light. So your bedtime lamp, maybe you have a little night light you keep on, all of that impacts your sleep. Your phone, a lot of people that are big into sleep studies, they'll actually put it on airplane mode so that there's no like type of connection or communication at all, no signaling happening. They say that that really does help with sleep as well. If you're somebody that sleeps with your phone up and you get notifications during the night, you might not be aware of it, but that screen light pops up, could be impacting your sleep. So put it down, turn on airplane mode. Cold bedroom, I already talked about that. Get outside for daily natural daylight. It's recommended up to about 30 minutes a day, if you can, of natural sunlight. And this is recommended especially when you wake up in the morning. We are getting those rays from the sun, that natural daylight, to spark our like awakening response and shut off that melatonin, because we don't want melatonin to be continuing to be produced as we're waking up, which where some people feel groggy. If they're kind of waking up and everything is still kind of dark outside, maybe in their apartment it's really dark, you'll just feel a little bit groggy. But getting some sunlight obviously is most optimal as soon as you wake up. Don't lie in bed awake at night. Get up and do something relaxing until you feel sleepy. If you're laying in bed and you're tossing and turning, I can't sleep, you're causing more stress to your body, and that's going to impact how you sleep. You're not going to fall asleep if you're feeling stressed and anxious. So just go get up and do something to help you just relax down and to stop thinking about, oh, I can't fall asleep. Blue light reduction after 8 p.m. if you're going to be on screens. This has been a huge issue with more technology, more times we're on our phone, all this stuff. People will literally be laying in bed, scrolling through their phone. Try to stop that. If you're jet lagged or you're a night shift worker, recommendation is to take vitamin D as soon as you wake up. That's what we get from the sunlight. So if you're a night shift worker or you're jet lagged coming different time zones or whatever, as soon as you wake up, wherever you are, take some vitamin D, and then before you go to bed, wherever you are, take melatonin. That is best to help with get your sleep and wake cycles aligned. I mentioned earlier, calorie deficits impact our ability to sleep and sleep quality. Do not take sleeping pills for help. It is addictive. They don't actually mimic a natural sleep cycle. Leads to grogginess, which has kind of a vicious circle where you have increased grogginess and you reach for caffeine, and then you're more tired. So like you're taking more sleeping pills again, which you have increased grogginess, and you have more and more cups of caffeine to try to, it's just a vicious cycle. Same thing with just general sleep loss. People reach for caffeine and it's a vicious cycle that they need more and they need more and they need more, which prevents their sleep from occurring more and more. Also increased risk for cancer if you are taking sleeping pills, and also the occupation, if you want to say, behind sleeping pills, whether you're a night shift worker or whatever. Reading on an iPad versus a book suppress melatonin by over 50% at night. Remember, we want melatonin up at night. And by reading on an iPad, increased or suppress that by 50%. Don't pull an all-nighter. Like a lot of you be like, no duh, but how many of you have done it? Probably a lot. They actually did a lot of studies on college students who pulled in all-nighters, and what they were able to retain and remember the next day was astonishing. Don't snooze. Snoozing just increases that stress response, that fight or flight of, oh shit, you turn off the alarm. It goes off again, oh shit, turn it off. You just keep, I guess I want to say, that fight or flight response continuously, which increases cortisol, which we know cortisol increases our waistline and hypertension and all this negative stuff. So the best thing you could do is to not snooze. Try to get a consistent sleep and wake cycle. You can wake up with an alarm, just don't snooze it, because that repetitive snoozing is more and more times that system is activated where, before you even start your day, you're in a heightened state, which really sucks. So supplements to aid to help with sleep, melatonin, obviously you naturally create it, but if you want a little bit more help, or maybe whatever the occasion is, you're sleeping in a hotel, somewhere where you're kind of foreign to, maybe that would be something to add in. L-theanine, magnesium, and the different types of magnesium is glycinate, tartrate, never even heard of that one, even citrate. Those are all a safe bet. They're not the laxative kind. And I think there's a lot of teas that are, I don't know how to say this one either, but I know there's a lot of teas that help with this here. And I have seen studies and recommendations that have shown fats in your last meal help improve sleep. So that's a suggestion as well. So a little bit more on caffeine. 2 things determine our sleep: our 24-hour circadian rhythm, and 2, sleep pressure. And sleep pressure is actually a neurotransmitter that is released as we're winding down into our hours. It slowly accumulates and then adds up to that feeling of, oh, I'm sleepy. Maybe that's where you're yawning. Like you actually feel that urge of sleep, right? Those 2 things indicate sleep. So caffeine actually blocks this. I just call it sleep pressure, but it's really the neurotransmitter for sleep at its receptor site. So this hormone, the sleep pressure, is trying to attach onto these receptors, and it builds up so that you eventually go to sleep. So caffeine actually blocks that. It comes in front of that receptor, but those natural sleep pressure hormones that you create as you're going to sleep still build up. So here we have this huge wall of this sleepiness pressure, and caffeine is literally right in between your cell receptors, not letting it happen. So they're all still there. Caffeine lasts up in your system for 8 to 12 hours. And actually the half-life, which means half of it is rid of your body within 5 to 7 hours. So think about that when you're thinking of your last cup of coffee. Only half of the caffeine in your system is gone by 5 to 7 hours. So if you're having that cup of coffee, maybe at dinner, I know a lot of people have done that. Maybe that's older people, they typically do a coffee with their dinner or something like that. That's gonna definitely impact your sleep there. Caffeine tricks you into feeling alert. Meanwhile, high levels of that sleeping feeling are built up. So that is where you'll get that crash. So how I talked about, that's all built up on the receptors. Once caffeine is gone away, so I think this is on the next slide, liver enzyme releases this, so it breaks down caffeine, and now your body is finally getting all that buildup pressure of those hormones that make you feel sleepy. So that's why that huge crash typically happens with caffeine, is because they have blocked those receptors, and now finally it's gone. All of that is flooded to your system to make you sleepy. Decaf still contains caffeine. I think it's 15 to 30 milligrams per cup of coffee. So if you're drinking, say 2 to 3 cups of decaffeinated coffee, that still equals out to about a normal cup of coffee. So you're still impacting your body there. Our ability to clear out caffeine goes down as we get older. So there are special occasions where, or rare conditions where, some people will not be affected at all by having caffeine at night. It's a rarity, but there are people that are out there like that. They can have an espresso shot at 12 p.m. and fall asleep at, I don't want to say 12 p.m. They can have an espresso shot at 9 p.m. and fall asleep by like 10. So there are rare people where that happens, but most people across the board, it's going to be in your system like this and will impact your sleep. And this just kind of mentions that liver enzyme that releases to allow those gates to be open for caffeine to go away. And I just dropped in here just some graphs from the book, or I don't know, I guess they're called figures. But this is what they showed for NBA player performance of more than 8 hours of sleep versus less than 8 hours of sleep. So they had increased time playing, increased points per minute, increased 3-point percentage, increased free throw percentage, and about 37 had increased turnovers that didn't have 8 hours of sleep, and a 45% increase in fouls committed. So just right there in player performance, you're going to have greater performance. I remember in college, they would tell us before track meets to make sure we got good sleep. Say our meet was on Saturday, they'd be like, Thursday night, you better get the best sleep that you possibly can. And there is some truth to that, but it doesn't mean to say that the night before the sleep doesn't matter either. So they neglected to kind of care for that. But what they were basically saying is that your rest and recovery, that day or two, or I guess 2 days prior to your performance, you're going to have improved performance. So I ingrained that in my mind. So Thursday nights I would tap out way early because I listened to whatever they said. But in theory, it shouldn't just be the Thursday night you care about getting a sleep. It should be, you know, the Friday night too. This one is just a correlation between sleep loss and obesity. And it is only up to just after the 2000s. So this is still not very up to date, but still pretty crazy. And this is obviously I could go on so many more things about how sleep impacts different areas of us, our health, but you know, obviously if we're talking about immunity, we have to talk about also it impacts our chance of injuries. So you know, that's why I say if you didn't get good sleep, don't show up to the gym. You have more increased risk of injury. Not, you know, being careful about your movement, not being slow with your movement and control, more likely to get injured. And this is kind of relative to that too, based off the sleep loss and sports injuries. So high increase of injury with 6 hours. Whew, look at that. But even at 9 hours, you still have 8 hours, you have about 30%. So that's crazy. Crazy. And I just dropped this in here from the book. I am one of those people that highlight everything. And I was trying to drill into my head the different cycles of sleep, because when I talk about sleep quality, this is really what it's looking at. So, you know, it's looking at your REM sleep. That's that rapid eye movement sleep. And you go into, I guess, 3 or 4 different phases of non-REM sleep, where your body is, or your brain's doing a lot of different things compared to REM sleep. But these are the cycles that we go through. And, you know, in a typical night, it's looking at, you would have about 5 cycles going through these stages. So this is what quality, you know, sleep we're talking about. When, you know, you can get 6 hours or 7 hours, right? But how is the sleep quality? And you guys might have your Fitbits and Apple Watches, and even my watch tries to determine this for me based off of my heart rate. But I don't feel like it's accurate enough to say that your watch can assess all this, but it is trying to go based off of your heart rate, because your heart rate does correlate with a lot of these phases, right? Rapid eye movement, we're going to see higher heart rate because that is the typical phase that we're in. So it is kind of following this, but I will say your watch isn't going to be as accurate as actually having like a sleep study and in this manner. So let's go into sleep positions, because I don't think people talk about this enough. And this is kind of where that therapy comes into play with, based off of what I know. Sleeping on your back, if you're somebody that's just sleeping on your back, try to put a bolster or a pillow under the back of your knee, or if you can, you know, if you're pregnant or whatever, maybe if you're pregnant, put a pillow under the bottom of your feet so your legs are still elevated. But if you ever get a massage, they typically set you up like this. So put a bolster under your knees if you're laying on your back. And in the therapy world, we're literally trying to match all the arches of your body. So we'll even put a small thin pillow underneath your low back to help your low back out. This is helping your hips too, by getting your hips in neutral rather than here. Your hips are in neutral, right? Especially if you got an ass. Like, this is not going to be ideal if you got any bit of a butt. You're just going to be hurting. So put something under the back of your knees. I think I dive into this a little bit more, but you know, these are trying to highlight the areas that aren't good. So I'll dive into these separately. So sleeping on your back, put a roll or pillow under the back of your knees or feet elevated with that pillow stacked up. Optional is to put a roll under your low back, or like I said, a really thin pillow underneath your low back. And make sure your pillows allow for proper alignment of your neck with your spine. So see here on this top picture, kind of has a kinked neck because the pillow might be a little bit too high in one area, definitely offsetting the spine here. So in this bottom image, we see a pillow that is suitable for a neck in good posture with relation to the rest of the spine. So pillows are important. Sleeping on your stomach. So be careful if you have GERD, acid reflux, if you're pregnant. A lot of this isn't going to be ideal for you sleeping on your stomach. If you are on your stomach, put a bolster or roll or pillow under your ankle joint. So that is right here. This image shows it here as well, but in ideal situations, you're going to put it here. That's just to take some stress off of your hips as well. And again, if you've ever been at a massage table, they hook you up with this as well. Putting that under your ankles, you just feel like so good. Instantly, you're like, oh, wow, never thought about that. But it feels so good. And again, this would be a thin pillow here on your hips. That is just, again, to align, because if you are, laying on your stomach, decrease space. So they're just kind of implying to put a little pillow under here to bring up your hips a little bit more in line. And again, you're going to want a pillow that's not too small or too large, that just keeps that good neutral spine. Sorry, my mouth's getting dry. Sleeping on your side, this is a big one. If you're sleeping on your side, be careful with shoulder issues or nerve entrapment. Some of you might have woken up from sleeping on your side and your hands numb. So some positions for that: place a pillow between your legs. You must, if you're sleeping on your side, put a pillow between your legs. This figure doesn't show it justice, but essentially what's happening is this hip is kind of being like this by having the top leg being pulled down. So if you think about it, that top leg is offsetting your hips as you're sleeping. So putting in a little pillow between your knees, there's like a body pillow I think a lot of pregnant women have. It's not a bad thing, even if you're not pregnant, just to have that to help contour your body correctly. Again, it has a pillow here. Again, this is not in all situations, but they're saying for optimal comfort. Use that, and then a pillow, again, to align with your neck, with your spine. And this was a little video from a YouTube account I follow. It's a lot of rehab and physical therapy people, but I thought it was a great view of, hopefully this takes me to it. So if I click the video, it should take me to it, to their Instagram post on sleep position. So if you want to see this in their funny way, you can kind of watch that here. I don't know if you guys will be able to hear it though. Can you guys hear it? No. Now can you? No. I think because I have my AirPods on, you can't. Anyways, just, I guess, watch without listening. I kind of have two stuffed animals that go under my arms, but I'll let you guys watch the rest of that so you can actually hear what he's saying. But just kind of setting up pillows kind of all around the body. Biggest thing is keeping your hips and your spine in neutral. And I think that might be it that I talk about. Yeah, that's it. Does anybody have any questions at all? I know that was kind of a lot. And there's a lot more, obviously, I could talk about, which is why I'm like referencing you to like hit this up.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So with all of the like pillows and sleeping positions, do you have like a preference as to like the firmness of a mattress? Like, is there such thing as too firm or too hard that would sway that one way or the other?
I don't want to say yes or no, because that's all person related. If you are somebody that likes a more firm bed and you generally know that that's more comfortable for you, I can't say, well, no, you should have softer. I think there obviously should be a good balance between not too soft that you literally cave into it and your body can't withstand the, I guess, sinking into it, because sinking isn't necessarily a good thing because you don't get support. So I think there needs to be a fine midline between the two, but if you generally feel you like one way versus the other, I don't think anything's wrong with that, as long as you know that that's comfortable for you. Okay. Same thing with pillows too.
Yeah. Another question too then that kind of relates. So I had one of those pregnancy pillows and it was okay for a while. But I struggled, or I would feel like crap in the morning. If I'm like surrounded by pillows, I might be comfortable in one position going to sleep. How do you stay asleep or stay comfortable without completely waking up to shift positions, but
Yeah.
still keeping your spine in line?
I would say that that's more of an issue with sleep quality. I don't think it's necessarily your sleep environment, because we should be able to change positions as we're sleeping without waking up, right? So if you're waking up when you're changing positions, I think that needs to be dived in a little bit deeper to the reasons why you're not able to sleep through the night. If you're super uncomfortable in one position, your body wouldn't naturally want to go there. Your body always wants the best for you. So if you're in a position through the night where you feel like, well, that was super painful or uncomfortable, your body shouldn't have let you go there in the first place. So a lot of people who wake up in the middle of the night with pain, that's a huge sign that there's a big issue your body's trying to let you know of, because you should never wake up in pain, from pain, or have pain. But that's a different point. But I hope I answered your question there, that I don't feel like your position should wake you up in the middle of the night.
Okay. And then just another comment. It's super funny to hear like all of, well, not funny, but it's cool to hear all of this from you. Zach actually works in the sleep industry. So
Does he really?
He works for ResMed, and so we've got a bunch of different like CPAPs and ventilators and stuff here that he demonstrates and stuff on. And he slept on one not too long ago in different masks and stuff. He slept on one to demonstrate with one of his DMEs. So it's kind of cool to hear you talk about different stages of sleep and all of that.
Yeah, I'm sure he knows a lot more about stages of sleep, but have you, anything that I mentioned tonight, have you heard about that from him, or does he kind of just not talk work? Some people just don't.
Yeah, no, he talks about it a lot. He thinks it's, really interesting. It's kind of in the realm of like what he went to school for. So he talks about that kind of stuff a lot, and it's just really interesting.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'd love to get some more information from him, or if he has any stuff he'd like, yo, you guys might want to hear about this. Feel free to if he tells you anything, feel free to drop those knowledge bombs on us, because I'd be willing to keep hearing more stuff just to solidify more of why it's important. I think we could talk ourselves out on occasions, right? Like on the weekend, you're like, well, I want to hang out with my friends. It's so easy to talk ourselves out of it, but the next day you suffer. I think Saturday night for me, I was up late hanging out with his friend. And yesterday I was emotionally just I was in a funk, and it was really, really bad. And I was like, this 100% has to be because I stayed up late, and my body just wakes up around, whatever time that is. It's early. I didn't get to sleep my full how many hours I should be, even though I went to bed at 2 a.m. So I can say that it definitely impacts me a lot if I don't get good sleep. So last night I went to bed at 9. And I felt great today.
So I'll say two things. One thing, Logan literally is the kind of guy that you talked about, or the kind of person that